Vice President JD Vance is there in Israel. He said that there is still work to be done and a long road ahead. Just from your view, what are some of those biggest hurdles that we could actually see progress on in the coming days and weeks?
Yeah, thanks for having me again. I mean, I think that JD Vance's visit is really meant to throw more weight behind this peace proposal, because one should note that this was a peace plan, not just a ceasefire agreement. And we're already seeing the ceasefire agreement fall apart within the first week. So there's a lot of hurdles ahead. In answer to your question, in terms of aid trucks going in, Israel has already said that it's slashing that in half due to the delayed return of deceased hostages from Hamas. We've seen 100 killed in recent days due to Israeli airstrikes. We're seeing a lot of lawlessness in Gaza right now because there's really no security mechanisms in place. So there's a lot that can potentially go wrong. So it's good to hear the vice president saying they understand that the signing of this first phase of the agreement is not the end of it and that there's a lot of hard work ahead. Because I think myself and many other analysts watching this very closely have said exactly that the end of U.S. pressure to move this through is simply not over.
Hard work is a given, Natasha, but what's the threshold for violence? Sunday, I wondered if we would still have a ceasefire by the time the work week opened here when Israel launched strikes against Hamas in Gaza, suspended all aid shipments. How many more headlines like that can a ceasefire survive?
Thank you so much for that question. I think it's a really vital question for all of us to be asking, because the reality, I think, is that the U.S. and the international community might accept a very low boil, essentially, of violence in Gaza as long as it wasn't making the headlines quite in the same way that the famine and the constant bombardment was just days earlier. But the reality is that Israel can really put the pressure on Gaza simply through these aid obstructions, as we've seen in the past week, and these sort of more irregular airstrikes, in addition to the fact that Israeli forces still occupy more than half of Gazan territory. So, there's the direct violence of the actual war and the conflict, but then there's also the indirect violence on a place that has been experiencing widespread famine and, really requires somewhat of a Marshall Plan, not just sort of a seeping in of hundreds of trucks per day. It really needs to be a pronounced, scaled up response to reverse, I think, some of that indirect violence. But I think the issue here is whether or not there's going to be put in place a monitoring mechanism that really looks at not just the number of trucks going through, but actually the effects on the ground. Are we seeing a reversal of a lot of the various issues that I just mentioned, starvation, the lack of medical personnel and equipment? Are we seeing a reversal and a rebuilding of the Gaza Strip? Because we haven't even gotten to, the phase 2 where we're talking about an international stabilization force, the actual rebuilding of Gaza. 80% of the structures have been destroyed in the Gaza Strip. So there's a long road ahead.
Well, speaking about these big questions, including what the reconstruction of Gaza is going to look like, another big question is surrounding the future of whether or not Hamas is going to disarm. And we heard from President Trump earlier today on Truth Social, posting that if Hamas does not disarm, quote, an end to Hamas will be fast, furious, and brutal, unquote. Can you just give us a little bit of context here? What do the discussions look like for Hamas to disarm, and what are we looking at if the group ultimately doesn't?
Right. So let's just zoom out a little bit and acknowledge the fact that Hamas, regardless of what anyone thinks of them, has been the government in Gaza for over 2 decades and has also been essentially the police force there. And right now you have essentially vacuums throughout the Gaza Strip. There is no international stabilization force. There is no other entity. And so you've seen rising inter-clan, inter-gang violence in Hamas, which in Gaza, which Hamas has, essentially tried to eradicate through these very public executions that we've seen in recent days. But I think the real question is if you disarm Hamas, which is clearly the goal of many regional partners in Israel and the United States and others, what will take its place? Because there needs to be some kind of governance structure in Gaza, and there needs to be some kind of police force as well. Because what we've seen is Israel has also been supporting some of these other gangs and militias within Gaza that have been looting aid in recent months. So there needs to be something there. So I think the big question is, if the international stabilization force, by some accounts, might take months to actually put in place, what's going to be there in the meantime? To restore order, to allow humanitarian workers to go through in safety, et cetera. And that's a really big question. And so I think for that reason, you've seen President Trump essentially go back and forth on this. At one point, he said he's not so unhappy about seeing these public executions of gang members by Hamas, and at the same time saying that they need to eradicate Hamas if it fails to disarm. So, I mean, I think that this is the larger question: who is going to provide security in Gaza in the weeks and months ahead?
Natasha, the president said a lot in that post at 9 o'clock this morning, including numerous of our now great allies, as he called them, in the Middle East and areas surrounding the Middle East, have explicitly and strongly, with great enthusiasm, informed me they would welcome the opportunity at my request to go into Gaza with a heavy force and straighten out Hamas if Hamas continues to act badly in violation of their agreement with us. I'm just wondering your thoughts on the neighbors, as the president likes to call them, in light of the headline today that the Saudi Crown Prince will be visiting the White House next month. What will that meeting bring?
Yeah, well, I think the Saudi Crown Prince, MBS, will be focused very much on a defense pact with the United States rather than simply offering a peace force, as he put it, to the Gaza Strip. Listen, I don't think that this is attractive to any Arab or Muslim country. We're still seeing airstrikes. We're still seeing infighting. This is not an area that I think any Arab or Muslim country would want to inject their own forces into, because it's not really peacekeeping, it's peace enforcing, which one could also say is fighting. And so I think that that's the big issue today. It's probably not going to be a majority force from oil-rich nations, but it's probably going to be from Egypt and other countries that actually stand up a pretty major military elements, or have a larger military to offer to the Gaza Strip. But I think that remains to be seen, again, what those forces will entail. We haven't even really talked very much about how much money these oil-rich countries are willing to inject into Gaza, which is going to take about $50 billion or more to reconstruct. So, again, I think we're a long ways off from seeing Saudi forces in Gaza.